The tension hit its peak before anyone in Islamabad had finished their morning coffee. American warships were repositioning, and word out of Washington was that the strikes on Iran could begin within the week. That single line, delivered by a war correspondent citing senior American officials, was the moment everything else in this story orbited around. At Camp David, during a cabinet session, President Trump had reportedly told his advisors that Tehran kept provoking the situation and that plans for a heavy military strike against Iran were already taking shape. American media outlets went further, reporting that Washington and Israel were eyeing Iran's nuclear infrastructure specifically. The Pentagon's chief spokesperson wouldn't confirm anything about timing, and when pressed, the spokesperson said only that no comment would be made about possible assets in Iran until the president made his decision. But the message underneath was unmistakable. The Department of Defense stood fully ready to execute the moment the order came down. Tehran answered almost immediately, and not quietly. Citing the Tasnim news agency, Iranian officials said their armed forces had both the capability and the intent, and that a complete operational plan was already sitting ready. Major General Abdullahi, one of the senior commanders of Iran's Quds force, put it bluntly. The era of provoking and then running away was over. Anyone miscalculating and launching an operation against Iran would face the consequences. He added pointedly that America and what he called its hired soldiers should understand that body bags now belonged in their military inventory right alongside their weapons. It's the kind of line that makes you wonder how close the world actually stood to a wider war that week, and whether either side truly believed the other would blink first. Now rewind, because this Iran standoff was only one thread pulling at Pakistan that week, and the other threads were just as loud. Inside the country, the military spokesperson, the Director General of Inter-Services Public Relations, Lieutenant General Ahmed Sharif Chaudhry, stood in front of reporters and delivered a message aimed squarely at militant groups. There would be no negotiations with terrorists. Either they surrendered their weapons or the state would eliminate them. He said it plainly, no hedging, and followed it with numbers meant to back up the claim. Over the past year, security forces had carried out more than 400 intelligence-based operations, killing upwards of 2,084 suspected militants in the process. Across that same stretch, the country had endured 28 suicide bombings, and in most of those blasts, investigators traced the attackers back to Afghan nationals. That accusation led straight into a harder one. The general said the Afghan Taliban regime had made terrorism into a kind of business, that the only real difference between Afghanistan and India, in his words, was a matter of DNA, because their shared agenda, as he framed it, was terrorism itself. He promised that militants and anyone facilitating them would be made to suffer 100 times over, suffer badly enough that they'd remember it until Judgment Day. And then, almost as a footnote that mattered more than it sounded, he added that Pakistan was, unfortunately, not what people call a hard state. A hard state, he explained, is one where every affair runs strictly according to constitution and law, where the law applies equally to everyone, and he was careful to clarify that being a hard state absolutely does not mean the military runs the country's affairs. That distinction seemed to be the thread holding his whole briefing together. He said loyalty to the state was something every citizen owed, because where there's a state, politics can exist at all. He pointed to the National Election Plan's 14 points, on which, he said, all political parties had reached agreement. Stability in the state, he argued, was the very thing that made continuity possible for politics, for democracy, for the nation's broader affairs. The state, he said, is the life of all of us, and Pakistan is our first and last identity. Without good governance, he added, the country's problems simply can't be solved, and something concrete has to be done about it. He said Pakistan badly needed a better system of governance and that the military had been pointing this out for years. That governance comment, it turned out, was really an answer to a question a reporter had asked about recent remarks from Federal Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi, who had floated the idea of creating new provinces as part of a good governance push. The general clarified that the Interior Minister had only been expressing a personal opinion, but he didn't dismiss the underlying issue. Good governance, he said, was an extremely important and serious matter for Pakistan. The population had quadrupled, he pointed out, and yet the country still had exactly the same 4 provinces it always had. We need to think about this, he said. He argued that most of the challenges facing the country traced back to governance and administrative structure, but he was careful to say that deciding how reforms should happen and how far they should go was ultimately a job for political parties and politicians. They have the capacity to solve these problems, he said, and they will solve them. From there, the briefing turned toward Balochistan, and the tone sharpened again. He described the unrest there as, at its core, a problem created by tribal chiefs and elites, saying that specific interest groups were behind the deteriorating situation in the province. These Sardars, he said, want a cut of a budget worth ₹1 trillion. Smuggling, he claimed, has become their business model, running narcotics and diesel across the border. He accused the elite and tribal leadership of wanting to keep poor children from ever getting ahead, of treating the levies force as their own personal security detail, and of wanting the salaries that come with controlling that force for themselves. And if you try to stop them, he said, they threaten to unleash terrorism in response. Their real complaint, he said, is that nobody's kissing their feet anymore, and what they actually want the levies force for is guarding their private residences. We're not going to talk to the elite class or the tribal chiefs, he said. We're going to talk to the people of Balochistan. Kashmir came next, and here the general's tone shifted from operational to almost sentimental, even as the underlying message stayed hard-edged, a warning aimed at anyone watching from across the border. Kashmir, he said, is Pakistan's own vein, and it was, is, and will remain so. He called it the most beloved child of Pakistan, the region that receives the largest share of the nation's resources. Kashmir, he said, remains the unfinished business of the partition of the subcontinent, and it's up to the Kashmiri people themselves to decide whether their future lies with Pakistan or with India. He said the protest movements there want their demands met at the point of a stick, and countered that the state's answer has always been the same. Contest elections, take your seats in the assembly, and their real agenda becomes clearer to everyone watching, he added. Even now, he said, voices rise from within Pakistan, chanting that Kashmir will become part of Pakistan. Then he pivoted to something a cleric had reportedly said about martyrs, calling the remarks incomprehensible and noting, with visible irritation, that the comment had made India happy. You're speaking, he told reporters, in language India wants to make its own narrative. We don't need our nation more confused than it already is. Politicians, he said, need to give the public clarity, not more noise. And then came the line the whole briefing seemed to be building toward. The military stands behind the philosophy of martyrdom, and every soldier who puts on that uniform has already made peace with sacrificing his today for your tomorrow. It's the kind of sentence you hear from a military spokesperson in almost any country, and it raises the same question everywhere it's said, whether the people making that promise for others ever have to make it themselves. On foreign relations, the general touched on Saudi Arabia, calling the two countries strategic partners, describing Saudi Arabia as the custodian of the two holy mosques and Pakistan as their protector and defender. He extended the same warmth to the United Arab Emirates, calling them a brotherly nation, and added a broader observation that no two countries in the world share identical views on absolutely everything, and that anyone running a propaganda campaign hoping to drive a wedge between them would never succeed. To back up his claims about cross-border terrorism, he played documentary footage for the assembled press, video that included targeted operations against militant hideouts inside Afghanistan. Footage, he said, exposed the hollowness of claims made by foreign organizations operating under the banner of human rights. Maps were also shown pinpointing militant hideouts inside Balochistan itself. Back on the domestic political front, a gap opened up between the Interior Minister's comments and the military spokesperson's framing of them, and that gap had a political dimension all its own. Defense Minister Khawaja Asif weighed in, fully endorsing what the military spokesperson had said, while also acknowledging that cracks exist between his party and the Pakistan People's Party. There's no sign right now, he said, of the current setup going anywhere, And in the present circumstances, our salvation lies in the success of this hybrid arrangement. Pakistan's military, he added, is our red line. People's Party chairman Bilawal Bhutto released a video message of his own around the same time, one that read almost like a counterweight to some of the sharper rhetoric elsewhere. Our soldiers, he said, are the pride of the nation and shouldn't become a target of political debate. A soldier standing at the Kashmir border isn't just guarding a line on a map, he said. He's leaving his home, his parents, his children, putting his own life on the line to protect Pakistan. Honoring those who sacrificed there today for our tomorrow, he said, is a responsibility we all share, and the sacrifices of our fallen soldiers and police officers can never be forgotten. It's worth sitting with that image for a second, a young man leaving a house full of people who love him to stand somewhere cold and dangerous for a cause he may never fully see resolved, and wondering how you'd feel if that was someone in your own family. Sindh's Chief Minister, Murad Ali Shah, wasn't nearly as generous toward Naqvi's proposal, calling it stale and recycled. I've heard Mohsin Naqvi's statement, he said, and I don't know what exactly he's pointing at. If Naqvi believes the system has broken down, let him bring forward an actual proposal, because what he's offered so far is nothing new. Sindh, he said, is the land of Sufis, and its people won't accept this. He noted, almost as a jab, that Pakistan's largest province is governed by the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, that Punjab runs on a coalition government, and that Sindh remains under People's Party rule. Away from politics entirely, there was a moment of quiet disappointment at the Commonwealth Games, where Pakistan's Arshad Nadeem finished 9th out of 12 finalists in the javelin throw, managing only one valid throw out of 3 attempts, his best mark landing at 77.41 meters. Sri Lanka's Rumesh Tharanga took gold with a throw of 89.75 meters. India's Neeraj Chopra took silver, and another Indian athlete, Yashvir Singh, took bronze. It's the sort of result that stings in a very specific way, watching someone who's carried a nation's hopes before come up short on a night when it mattered, and wondering if the story would have been told differently by evening if just one throw had gone a little further. Everyday economics offered no relief either. The daily adjustment of petroleum prices had become its own kind of test for ordinary people. The Oil and Gas Regulatory Authority made only a marginal cut, trimming petrol by 12 paisa a litre and diesel by 66 rupees. The new petrol price was set at 336 rupees and 30 paisa per litre, while diesel came in at 392 rupees and 38 paisa, with these rates set to hold until the 3rd of August, per the official notification. On the international market, crude climbed $11 in benchmark trading, with the Brent benchmark selling near $90 a barrel and West Texas Intermediate crossing $85 a barrel. Pakistan's stock market, at least, moved in the opposite direction, with the index gaining 546 points to close at 17,694. And then there was the weather, which seemed determined to remind everyone that geopolitics wasn't the only thing testing the country that week. A powerful monsoon spell turned entire neighborhoods into standing water. Islamabad's Barakahu Chowk became something close to a small lake under continuous rain, with floodwater pushing into homes and shops. In Murree, heavy downpours raised fears of landslides. Rawalpindi, Lahore, Mansehra, Tank and Swabi all saw significant rainfall, and even the desert region of Tharparkar was soaked by heavy clouds, where lightning strikes tragically killed 3 people. In Shakagar, a swollen stream washed away dirt roads and bridges connecting nearby villages, cutting people off from each other in an instant, the kind of sudden, indiscriminate damage that makes you realize how thin the line is between an ordinary day and a disaster, no matter what side of any border you happen to live on.